Are you joking? Are you joking? Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to be looking at how to write two different types of essay, and I'll be including exam technique. I will also be going through how I would pick apart a passage in an exam just to give you a kind of idea of how it would look. Disclaimer, I am not an expert. These are just my tips and tricks for how to write an English essay. First, we're going to start off with a passage-based question. I'm also going to include two of my actual essays that I've gotten feedback for. So the one for the passage-based question that we'll be looking at, I got a 15 on. For a passage-based question, what they want you to do is examine the text deeply, explore language, talk about imagery, lexicon, repetition, imperatives, plosive words, all of this stuff. When you get a passage-based question, first I would start by just picking apart the passage. I personally use highlighters to link together certain quotes that I think would fit together for a theme. Perhaps after you've annotated and put notes and things like that, you can come up with wider ideas that fit each section that you'll be writing about. A lot of people wonder if they should refer to other parts of the text. There's not really a problem with it as long as it's relevant to what you're planning to write. So if it's relevant, mention it. Otherwise, focus purely on the passage that you've been given, because that extract is what's going to give you the marks. In terms of coursework style passage-based questions, for background reading, and this goes for all essays actually, start off using library resources, whether in person or online. I tend to just use either books from the library or journal articles from JSTOR or other websites that I can find on the library search engine. For example though, some of the plays that we did this semester were quite modern, so I ended up finding things like the New York Times reviews or the Guardian's reviews. While I'm doing this researching process, I find it a lot quicker to save all my... What did I write there? Easier to save all my information on a Word document. So I would create a table. In one column would be ideas and short explanation. There would be the corresponding quotes and the page number in the next column. And I would write the citation as well before I include quotes from whatever critic it was. This just makes it a lot easier that when you're writing and your essay, you can just pop your references in. I don't know about other people. I've done it both ways. Firstly, where I reference as I go along. So I do the bibliography before I even start the essay. Then I footnote short footnotes, not detailed ones. And then at the end of the essay, when I'm done, I go and I put in the full footnotes before checking it again to make sure it fits the word count. But I know there are some people who they just leave the whole referencing until they fully finish their essay and then they go in and footnote things. I just think that ends up taking a lot more time, in the sense of you haven't got your footnotes in place, so you have to spend time looking for things, and I don't like doing that. It's happened to me once before and I regretted it so much not doing it how I always do it. And then once you have all of your points for each corresponding theme, then get started on a thesis statement. And thesis statement, everyone has so many issues with it, but essentially what it is 1 to 2 sentences that tells your reader what exactly you'll be discussing in your essay. Now to get into actually the nitty-gritty of it, for your introduction, you have this kind of starter, more generalized comment that still relates to your essay, and then you go into, this essay will examine or argue or aim to blah blah blah. I'll be reading from one of my essays. An attempt to lighten the feud between two Catholic families, Alexander Pope's The Rape of the Lock draws on satire to present the frivolities of the 18th century upper class in England. In this extract, Pope manipulates language to deepen the moral tone that accompanies Ariel's speech, drawing on warm imagery and making reference to the upbringing of contemporary women. This essay will explore Pope's ideas on the trivialities of the 18th century bourgeoisie and the connection between spirits and women. This is my introduction, and then general note as well, while you're writing your essay, don't be afraid to use I, but I think when you use I, it should be for a very specific purpose. Let's say you have a term that you want to define. In my last essay that I just submitted, I had two terms. I had the other and the subaltern, and I had to define those in my own terms. I didn't use I for that purpose, but I have done in the past, so you can say either for the purpose of this essay, this term will be defined as, or I will define this as, and then you define the term that you're going to be using. The main body of your essay, it depends on your essay, I would say, but you either make a point and begin by explaining it, or you make like a general comment opening the theme, and then you go into a specific point about language or structure or form. Pope employs the mock heroic by satirizing upper class society for their obsessions with trivial matters such as appearance and flattery. Then I go on to explain what the mock heroic is. The mock heroic imitates heroic literature in order to satirize a subject that is decidedly not heroic. And then once I've defined it, I go into an example. So it comes into frequent use throughout the extract, particularly with the young coquettes, who are taught to roll their eyes seductively in order to rise socially. And then I just add more points until I can draw it together and come up with something that links it together. This is something really important that I didn't realize until I got my first ever essay back. I was never told to split my sections into paragraphs. We always had 3 sections, 3 massive long paragraphs. That's not the case. Every time you make a new point, you should have a separate paragraph, even if it's in one section. It just makes every idea seem a bit more clear. And I know you do not want to hear it, but point evidence explained that they teach to us in literally year 7 is still so relevant. For example, over here, in a society rife with scandal, honour contrastingly prevents the loss of reputation. Honour is what guards the purity of melting maids in courtly balls and midnight masquerades, in a court where at every word a reputation dies. Pope's word choices of the repetitive M in melting maids and midnight masquerades emphasizes the disreputable actions of the impressionable young women and adds to their deceitfulness, suggesting they hide something far more disturbing behind their masks. In addition, Ariel's prideful attitude in "'Tis but their sylph, the wise celestials know," allows the reader to interpret the term honour as the sylph's unseen efforts. I've made a point, I've explained it, and then I've said in addition, and I've added another point onto it to keep the flow going and to add to that paragraph that I was discussing, because they're all very much related. They expand on one another. Then for your conclusion, don't be afraid to write in conclusion. You can write throughout the extract, we discussed this, or you can begin it with saying, while blah 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 blah, essentially blah 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 blah, and you come to conclusion. Or you say, by comparing this and this, we have drawn to this conclusion. What they want from you is evaluation, so just say, oh, something presents not only this, but also this. They really like that phrase. And use therefore, use thus. Don't be shy. I mean, don't use it too much, but don't be afraid to use it, I would say. Now, moving on to the thematic essay. When you get your thematic question, I would really pull apart the question because you need to fully understand what they're asking you to do. There have been times, not for English, but for history, that one time I had an essay on avant-garde nationalism. Apparently, I didn't understand properly what avant-garde nationalism was. Didn't do too well on that essay, and I think understanding the question is what's really important. One of my big tips, I would say, if you want to discuss your essay with a tutor, please go and do it in their office hours, because it has saved me multiple times thinking that I was going to pursue one path with an essay and then going to see my tutor in their office hour and then completely changing my perspective on on several different things. And also I think it just helps you so much more because you're writing for them. And sometimes it really pisses me off that tutors don't do this more often, but tutors will not tell you exactly what they want. It's some magic trick that you have to figure out for yourself, because I get contradicting advice from tutors all the time. So the best thing to do is to go and speak to them to fully discuss exactly what you want to do, have them give their opinion on it, and then you go forth and write it. For example, the essay that I'll be showing you today is actually the highest mark I've gotten for one of my essays, which is 18. What picture emerges of sexual intercourse from the Old English riddles, either in explicit descriptions or in implied ideas? From this question, we get that it's looking at the message of the riddles, examining language because it speaks about sexual imagery. So this is all in relation to sex. I think with the thematic essays, you need to expand a lot your contextual knowledge and the things that you've looked up. You should have context naturally anyway in all of your essays, but with thematic essays, you just take it a step higher because they really want you to look into that context as well. Here, I looked at Anglo-Saxon private life and its overlap between communal life and, of course, the private life. For example, Riddle 21 builds on the use of sexual movements through bold plosives strong and from, as the picture generated is one of a powerful moving object that is forceful both at its entrance and its departure. The riddler makes use of poetic techniques to build the riddle. The repeated whilom shows what can be called the anaphora of time. It builds on the idea that the sexual act was present in the everyday lives of Anglo-Saxons, lasting both through the riddle and through time. Incorporating the image of a suggestive movement, Nideth Swither, do not kill me for my Old English pronunciations. The riddler depicts sexual intercourse in a fast-moving, rough manner. The motion verb nidan can be compared with the verb nirian in Riddle 22. Both connote the sexual movement between a man and woman. Nirian generates a sense of urgency, especially when associated with the feminine object the subject of the riddle is penetrating. Vulgar and rash, these descriptions create a surprising assessment of Anglo-Saxon sexual intercourse, revealing an open attitude to intercourse, much alike our own modern world. Don't be afraid to talk about alternative views if you're able to, even if you disagree with a critic. So there's a small paragraph that I wrote. The formal solutions of these riddles speaks volumes about the initial editors of the Exeter book and their attitudes towards sex. They were Victorian and Edwardian, such as Tupper and Wyatt, and it is clear they were disinclined to engage with the sexual nature of the riddles. As such, when we look at the etymology of the word riddle, its educational function is made clear. Redan, to give advice, indicates the riddles infer to views about private life, allowing us to begin to perceive how sex was viewed in Anglo-Saxon society. One of perhaps the most important tips that I could ever give you is be cautious. Every single word that you use to describe something needs to be explained. There have been countless times where this has happened to me. For example, I've used the word alien and evil in an essay before because a critic has said it, so I've just quoted them, and then I've got in so much trouble for not explaining it, like spending a whole paragraph, because what comes with English is this idea of loaded words. If a word is loaded with meaning, it means that you have to define it in your own terms when you've decided to use it, like the word good or evil or blah blah blah. You just need to define them. That's what they want from you. Top tip as well, I have a very imaginative brain in the sense of English essays are usually 1,500 words in sub-honours. So they'll give you that word limit and then my mind will go, but wow, the question, oh my, and then go on and do so much work. And then I'll only use maybe half of it in the essay. When that happens, you have to change your thesis statement by the time you finished your essay because it'll no longer match the stuff you've cut out. Check that your essay properly fulfills the question. For my last essay that I did, initially I was going to talk about both the other and also socioeconomic and political stuff. to do with the essay. I ended up not having enough words to even discuss the economic issues, so I ended up having to rephrase my whole introduction because it didn't match the essay anymore. Some other places, for example, I had defined the subaltern and then I was going to talk about socioeconomic problems, but then I was like, but I'm not talking about economic problems, so I'm going to change that, and I changed it to social problems. For exam technique, one of the things by far that I have found to be a game changer is the inclusion of literary critics to boost my essay. One of the best things is because it's an exam, you don't need to memorize the book that they've written or the article or the page number or anything like that. The only thing you need to remember is the name of the critic and what their idea was, what they said. And you don't need to know that quote for quote either. I would stick to point, evidence, explain, expand, which is what I basically said, but it makes your life a lot easier. This is my point, here is my quote, let me explain it, and in addition, this quote, this explanation, reinforce your thesis. Oh, I was also going to show something from my exam. I do quite well in my exams. In your exams, include as much context as necessary. Selvin manages to bring the significance of the Windrush generation into his writing. The response of the clerk in the extract, "We haven't got anything for you at the moment," is an example of the racism faced by West Indian immigrants. The directed use of language of "you" indicates the job is not for a coloured man like Galahad, as there is nothing available for him. This can be linked with Moses' later comment, "If they don't want coloured fellas, they don't tell you straight, and instead say the position's been filled." That men are told in this subtle way is still considered a form of degradation because these men still face racial discrimination, even though it is of a much quieter kind than would be found in other places, such as the US. Furthermore, Selvin's use of a Crayolan dialect in his writing aids the racial underlyings of the text, allowing the voice, mannerisms, and spirituality of the West Indians, according to the critic Salick, to be represented in a richer way. Selvin himself has spoken on the importance of the language in The Lonely Londoners, having started the novel in standard English and finding it difficult to convey the right sort of tone. As you can see, I had context, quotations from the extract, followed by referencing to another point in the text, link it in with a critic, language, and then that was it. Also, I would say everyone bangs on about planning and, oh, it's so important to plan. It is important to plan. I definitely think you need at least 8 to 10 minutes to plan. What I usually do is, if it's a thematic essay, I will immediately come up with themes that I want and then just start writing quotes down because you'll forget. And let's say in the middle of your essay you remember something. Obviously you can asterisk that and add it in. Also, this is not an exam tip per se. This is more of a revision tip. The way that I revise for exams is I take all of the past paper questions and then I plan them extensively in depth, as well as I write critics' comments down on little flashcards and quotes as well. And when you just read through them, it just helps you memorize a lot easier. Specifically for exams here, I would say make sure to read both questions first because you're not allowed to repeat texts in the English exam at St. Andrews, you are not allowed to repeat the text. If you've used it for one question, you can't use it for the other. So that's why I think it's very important to just read both your questions first. I'm going to pop on screen an extract from EN 1004 exam that I had. In the exam, I ended up picking the Jane Austen extract from Northanger Abbey. So I decided this time I would pick a different extract and actually sit down and go through it and make notes as to what I would have planned for that passage-based essay. And let me remind you that this exam was done a year ago, so second semester of first year. While I remember the book, I do not remember extensive detail, so I had to look through some of my notes. What I did split it into was the 3 sections of supernatural versus religion, awareness and knowledge, and doubleness. For the supernatural versus religion, I picked out the quotes, bent on establishing some pure and genuine doctrines of Christianity. I was also certain that he was possessed of some supernatural power, Christian, and at the same time a powerful necromancer. I looked at the critic Smith, and Smith says that the narrative of Robert, we know that these events have already taken place. He's recounting the past. So this sets the tone with kind of this gloomy foreboding. There's like mention of darksome waste of like what his life will become. The narrative serves to rationalize and distort Robert's actions at the same time. So Robert is just a very unreliable narrator, but we do get the idea of this demon-like presence from Gilmartin. So if a demon could inherit flesh and bone, that youth is precisely such a being. This is a quote from another part of the book, which I think you can refer to when you're talking about the necromancer, supernatural power stuff. There's also this idea that religion is presented by Hogg as this sublime and glorious thing, but it's extremely dangerous depending on who teaches it. For awareness and knowledge, Robert time and time again fails to understand the perverseness of Gilmartin, and I think this section really delves into it. I was sojourning in the midst of a chaos of confusion. I was wholly ignorant. My principal feeling was an insatiable longing, utter oblivion. Here we get this firstly alliterative disorder and confusion with the chaos. He recognizes his own failings, but although I would say that he's very much in denial of a lot of things throughout the novel, which is what makes him such an unreliable narrator. There's this insatiable longing, utter oblivion. He has this desire that's impossible to satisfy, and he wants to be in complete unconsciousness to the world. I think this reflects much of his confused state. Not only does he misinterpret doctrine, but he never ceases his belief in his benevolence. Then we go into doubleness. I had the idea of weight imagery. So when I was by myself, I breathed freer, my step was lighter. When he approached, I moved and acted as if under a load that I could hardly endure. So Hogg uses this weight imagery to intensify Gilmartin's burden on Robert. Throughout the novel, there's this whole theme of psychology doubling. So Gilmartin reflects the evil side of Robert's character. We can see this in the bit where it says, to shake him off was impossible. We were incorporated together, identified with one another as if they were joined together in one soul. Hogg effectively shows that evil exists in the world as a function of man's dual nature, and that you can't have one without the other. While he does take great pains to show that Gilmartin is a person, he kind of has this elusive mystery about him that is somehow able to turn Robert time and time again to do evil acts. And so, yeah, that's the perspective that I would have taken for this passage. Again, mind you, I have not looked at this text in over a year, so my memory of direct things is not very spot on, so if I've missed something, I do apologise. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe for more content from Tom and I. Bye!